just turn around and leave me. The tear in my eye drops on the floor alongside my spear. My knees are drenching in the blood I spill just to get in. When I look around me, everything I had went up in flames. My lonely way. When I look around me, everything I had went up in flames. My lonely way. I never pray to God anymore. I'd rather no one hurt me. Redemption, I have waited for you to come and drown all my sin. My knees are drenching in the blood I spill just to get in. When I look around me, everything I had went up in
Okay, good evening, everybody. It is time for some more reading. Reading. So, we are on, I don't know what chapter it is because they're not numbered, but we are just a couple chapters away from the end of this book, The 12th Planet. Tonight we're reading the chapter titled The End of All Flesh, and then there are two more after that. So, So let's just jump right on into it. And then maybe by the end of this session, I might have an idea of what I want to read next or what I want to poll on. I have a few different ideas. Anyway, the end of all flesh. Man's lingering belief that there was some golden age in his prehistory cannot possibly be based on human recollection, for the event took place too long ago and man was too primitive to record any concrete information for future generations. If mankind somehow retains a subconscious sense that in those earliest days man lived through an era of tranquility and felicity, it is simply because man knew no better. It is also because the tales of that era were first told mankind, not by earlier men, but by the Nephilim themselves. The only complete account of the events that befell man following his transportation to the abode of the gods in Mesopotamia is the biblical tale of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Quote, "And the deity Yahweh planted an orchard in Eden in the east, and he placed there the Adam whom he had created. And the deity Yahweh caused to grow from the ground every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for eating. And the tree of life was in the orchard, and the tree of knowing good and evil. And the deity Yahweh took the Adam and placed him in the Garden of Eden, to work it and to keep it. And the deity Yahweh commanded the Adam, saying, Of every tree of the orchard eat you shall, but of the tree of knowing good and evil thou shalt not eat of it. For on the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. End quote. Though two vital fruits were available, the earthlings were prohibited from reaching only for the fruit of the tree of knowing. The deity at that point appeared unconcerned that man might try to reach for the fruit of life, yet man could not adhere even to that single prohibition, and tragedy followed. The idyllic picture soon gave way to dramatic developments, which biblical scholars and theologians call the fall of man. It is a tale of unheeded divine commandments, divine lies, a wily but truth-telling serpent, punishment, and exile. Appearing from nowhere, the serpent challenges God's solemn warnings. Quote, And the serpent said unto the woman, Hath the deity indeed said, Ye shall not eat of any tree of the orchard? And the woman said unto the serpent, Of the fruits of the trees of the orchard eat we may. It is of the fruit of the tree in the midst of the orchard that the deity hath said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither touch it, lest ye die. And the serpent said unto the woman, Nay, ye shall surely not die. It is that the deity doth know that on the day ye eat thereof, your eyes will be opened, and ye will be as the deity, knowing good and evil. And the woman saw that the tree was good to eat, and that it was lustful to behold, and the tree was desirable to make one wise. She took of its fruit and did eat, and gave also to her mate with her, and he ate. And the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together, and made themselves loincloths. End quote. Reading and rereading the concise yet precise tale, one cannot help wondering what the whole confrontation was about. Prohibited under threat of death from even touching the fruit of knowing, the two earthlings were persuaded to go ahead and eat the stuff, which would make them knowing as the deity. Yet all that happened was a sudden awareness that they were naked. The state of nakedness was indeed a major aspect of the whole incident. The biblical tale of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden opens with the statement, And the both of them were naked, the Adam and his mate, and they were not ashamed. Quote unquote. They were, we are to understand, at some lesser stage of human development than that of fully developed humans. Not only were they naked, they were unaware of the implications of such nakedness. Further examination of the biblical tale suggests that its theme is man's acquisition of some sexual prowess. The knowing that was held back from man was not some scientific information, but something connected with the male and female sex. For no sooner had man and his mate acquired the knowing than, quote, they knew that they were naked, end quote, and covered their sex organs. The continuing biblical narrative confirms the connection between nakedness and the lack of knowing, for it took the deity no time at all to put the two together. Quote, And they heard the sound of the deity Yahweh walking in the orchard in the day's breeze, and the Adam and his mate hid from the deity Yahweh amongst the orchard's trees. And the deity Yahweh called to the Adam and said, Where art thou? And he answered, Thy sound I heard in the orchard, and I was afraid, for I am naked, and I hid. And he said, Who told thee thou art naked? Hast thou eaten of the tree whereof I commanded thee not to eat? End quote. Admitting the truth, the primitive worker blamed his female mate, who in turn blamed the serpent. Greatly angered, the deity put curses on the serpent and the two earthlings. Then, surprisingly, quote, the deity Yahweh made for Adam and his wife garments of skins and clothed them, end quote. One cannot seriously assume that the purpose of the whole incident, which led to the expulsion of the earthlings from the Garden of Eden, was a dramatic way to explain how man came to wear clothes. The wearing of clothes was merely an outward manifestation of the new knowing. The acquisition of such knowing, and the deity's attempts to deprive man of it, are the central themes of the events. While no Mesopotamian counterpart of the biblical tale has yet been found, there can be little doubt that the tale, like all the biblical material concerning creation and man's prehistory, was of Sumerian origin. We have the locale, the abode of the gods in Mesopotamia. We have the telltale play on words in Eve's name, she of life, she of rib, and we have two vital trees, the tree of knowing and the tree of life, as in Anu's abode. Even the words of the deity reflect a Sumerian origin, for the sole Hebrew deity has again lapsed into the plural, addressing divine colleagues who were featured not in the Bible but in Sumerian texts. Quote, "Then did the deity Yahweh say, Behold, the Adam has become as one of us, to know good and evil, and now might he put forth his hand and partake also of the tree of life, and eat and live forever? And the deity Yahweh expelled the Adam from the orchard of Eden." End quote. As many earlier Sumerian depictions show, there had been a time when man, as a primitive worker, served his gods stark naked. He was naked whether he served the gods their food and drink, or toiled in the fields, or on construction jobs. The clear implication is that the status of man vis-a-vis the gods was not much different from that of domesticated animals. And we have a couple of pictures here. So I will show you this one first. And he is naked, for sure. And then I'll show you this one. I'll blow it up a bit. And yeah, they're all done. No one's wearing clothes there. So, all right. The gods had merely upgraded an existing animal to suit their needs. Did the lack of knowing, then, mean that naked as an animal, the newly fashioned being also engaged in sex as or with the animals? Some early depictions indicate that this was indeed the case. And he has another picture. So, this one has lines across it. I think it's done deliberately to kind of... Oh, are we in an ad? We're in an ad. Never mind. I'll wait. I'll show you in a minute. Maybe I should go back and read a little bit. I don't know. Yeah, I'll go back and read that little bit of text and then show the picture. So I'll wait for the ad to end so anybody who's watching live can see all of this. I know it's not exciting to watch me just blather on, but, you know, hey. Okay, are we done? I think we're done. Okay, so I'm going to reread this because I didn't notice the ad was starting right away. So, the clear implication is that the status of man vis-a-vis the gods was not much different from that of domesticated animals. The gods had merely upgraded an existing animal to suit their needs. Did the lack of knowing then mean that, naked as an animal, the newly fashioned being also engaged in sex as or with the animals? Some early depictions indicate that this was indeed the case. And we have a picture here. It's got a bunch of lines across it, I think maybe done deliberately to censor the picture. So, yeah, there's that. Sumerian texts, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, suggest that the manner of sexual intercourse did indeed account for a distinction between wild man and human man. When the people of Uruk wanted to civilize the wild Enkidu, quote, "the barbarous fellow from the depths of the steeps," end quote, they enlisted the services of a pleasure girl, quote unquote, and sent her to meet Enkidu at the water hole where he used to befriend various animals, and there to offer him her ripeness, quote unquote. It appears from the text that the turning point in the process of civilizing Enkidu was the rejection of him by the animals he had befriended. It was important that the people the people of Uruk told the girl that she continued to treat him to a woman's task, quote unquote, until quote his wild beasts that grew up on his steep will reject him, end quote. For Enkidu, it to be torn away from sodomy was a prerequisite to his becoming human. Okay. Quote, the lass freed her breast, bared her bosom, and he possessed her ripeness. She treated him, the savage, to a woman's task, end quote. Apparently the ploy worked. After 6 days and 7 nights, quote, after he had had his fill of her charms, end quote, he remembered his former playmates. Quote, he set his face toward his wild beasts, but on seeing him the gazelles ran off. The wild beasts of the steppe drew away from his body, end quote. The statement is explicit. The human intercourse brought about such a profound change in Enkidu that the animals he had befriended, quote, drew away from his body, end quote. They did not simply run away, they shunned physical contact with him. Astounded, Enkidu stood motionless for a while, quote, for his wild animals had gone, end quote. But the change was not to be regretted, as the ancient text explains. Quote, now he had vision, broader understanding. The harlot says to him, to Enkidu, thou art knowing, Enkidu. Thou art become like a god, end quote. The words in this Mesopotamian text are almost identical to those of the biblical tale of Adam and Eve. As the serpent had predicted, by partaking of the tree of knowing, they had become, in sexual matters, as the deity, knowing good and evil. If this meant only that man had come to recognize that having sex with animals was uncivilized or evil, why were Adam and Eve punished for giving up sodomy? The Old Testament is replete with admonitions against sodomy, and it is inconceivable that the learning of a virtue would cause divine wrath. The knowing that man obtained against the wishes of the deity, or one of the deities, must have been of a more profound nature. It was something good for man, but something his creators did not wish him to have. We have to read carefully between the lines of the curse against Eve to grasp the meaning of the event. Quote, and to the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy suffering by the pregnancy. In suffering shalt thou bear children, yet to thy mate shall be thy desire. And the Adam named his wife Eve, for she was the mother of all who lived. End quote. This indeed is the momentous event transmitted to us in the biblical tale. As long as Adam and Eve lacked knowing, they lived in the Garden of Eden without any offspring. Having obtained knowing, Eve gained the ability and pain to become pregnant and bear children, only after the couple had acquired this knowing. Quote, Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain. End quote. Throughout the Old Testament, the term to know is used to denote sexual intercourse, mostly between a man and his spouse for the purpose of having children. The tale of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden is the story of a crucial step in man's development, the acquisition of the ability to procreate. That the first representatives of Homo sapiens were incapable of reproduction should not be surprising. Whatever method the Nephilim had used to infuse some of their genetic material into the biological makeup of the hominids they selected for the purpose, the new being was a hybrid, a cross between two different, if related, species. Like a mule, a cross between a mare and a donkey, such mammal hybrids are sterile. Through artificial insemination and even more sophisticated methods of biological engineering, we can produce as many mules as we desire, even without actual intercourse between donkey and mare. But no mule can create and bring forth another mule. Were the Nephilim at first simply producing human mules to suit their requirements? Our curiosity is aroused by a scene depicted on a rock carving found in the mountains of southern Elam. It depicts a seated deity holding a, quote, laboratory flask, quote unquote, uh, from which liquids are flowing. A familiar depiction of Enki. A great goddess is seated next to him, a pose that indicates that she was a co-worker rather than a spouse. She could be none other than Ninti, the mother goddess or goddess of birth. The two are flanked by lesser goddesses reminiscent of the birth goddesses of the creation tales. Facing these creators of man are row upon row of human beings whose outstanding feature is that they all look alike, like products of the same mold. Our attention is also drawn again to the Sumerian tale of the imperfect males and females initially brought forth by Enki and the mother goddess, who were either sexless or sexually incomplete beings. And we have the picture of the rock carving. So let me bring that up. I'll show you. So here's the god, the goddess, and the rows of humans. Pretty straightforward. I wonder what this is, this kind of lightning boltish thing over the top and going through his, I don't know. Or is that tubing? I don't know. And this, what is this, like a person pouring out of the test tube? Interesting. All right. Does this text recall the first phase of the existence of hybrid man, a being in the likeness and image of the gods but sexually incomplete, lacking in knowing? After Enki managed to produce a perfect model, Adapa/Adam, mass production techniques are described in Sumerian texts. The implanting of the genetically treated ova in a production line of birth goddesses, with the advanced knowledge that half would produce males and half would produce females. Not only does this bespeak the technique by which hybrid man was manufactured, it also implies that man could not procreate on his own. The inability of hybrids to procreate, it has been discovered recently, stems from a deficiency in the reproductive cells. While all cells contain only one set of hereditary chromosomes, man and other mammals are able to reproduce because their sex cells, the male sperm, the female ovum, contain two sets each. But this unique feature is lacking in hybrids. Attempts are now being made through genetic engineering to provide hybrids with such a double set of chromosomes in their reproductive cells, making them sexually normal, quote unquote. And remember, this was written in the 70s. Was that what the god, whose epithet was the serpent, accomplished for mankind? The biblical serpent surely was not a lowly literal snake, for he could converse with Eve. He knew the truth about the matter of knowing, and he was of such high stature that he hesitatingly exposed the deity as a liar. We recall that in all ancient traditions, the chief deity fought a serpent adversary, a tale whose roots undoubtedly go back to the Sumerian gods. The biblical tale reveals many traces of its Sumerian origin, including the presence of other deities. Quote, the Adam has become as one of us, end quote. The possibility that the biblical antagonists, the deity and the serpent, stood for Enlil and Enki seems to us entirely plausible. Their antagonism, as we have discovered, originated in the transfer to Enlil of the command of Earth, although Enki had been the true pioneer, while Enlil stayed at the comfortable mission control center at Nippur. Enki was sent to organize the mining operations in the lower world. The mutiny of the Anunnaki was directed at Enlil and his son Ninurta. The god who spoke out for the mutineers was Enki. It was Enki who suggested and undertook the creation of primitive workers. Enlil had to use force to obtain some of these wonderful creatures. As the Sumerian text recorded the course of human events, Enki as a rule emerges as mankind's protagonist, Enlil as its strict discipliner, if not outright antagonist. The role of a deity wishing to keep the new human sexually suppressed, and of a deity willing and capable of bestowing on mankind the fruit of knowing, fit Enlil and Enki perfectly. Once more, Sumerian and biblical plays on words come to our aid. The biblical term for serpent is Nahash, which does mean snake, but the word comes from the root Nahash, N-H-S-H, which, as I recall, in ancient Hebrew, there are no vowels, so that makes sense. They added them later on. Nahash, which means, quote, to cipher, to find out, end quote. So that Nahash could also mean he who can decipher, he who finds things out. An epithet befitting Enki, the chief scientist, the god of knowledge of the Nephilim. Drawing parallels between the Mesopotamian tale of Adapa, who obtained knowing but failed to obtain eternal life, and the fate of Adam S. Langdon, Semitic mythology, reproduced a depiction unearthed in Mesopotamia that strongly suggests the biblical tale, a serpent entwined on a tree pointing at its fruit. Hold on just a second. I keep getting this first time chat. Okay. Every time it comes up as a first time chat, but it's the same message. So I am going to do something here. Yeah, it's a brand new account too. There. All right. Sorry about that. Getting back to this. Pointing at its fruit. Okay. The celestial symbols are significant. High above is the planet of crossing, which stood for Anu. Near the serpent is the moon's crescent, which stood for Enki. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and show you that picture. So the planet of crossing, the crescent for Enki, the serpent around the tree. I don't see that it's actually pointing at the fruit, but okay, whatever. Most pertinent to our finding is the fact that the Mesopotamian texts, the god who eventually granted knowledge to Adapa was none other than Enki. Quote, wide understanding he perfected for him, wisdom he had given him, to him he had given knowledge, eternal life he had not given him. End quote. A pictorial tale engraved on a cylinder seal found in Mari may well be an ancient illustration of the Mesopotamian version of the tale in Genesis. The engraving shows a great god seated on high ground, rising from watery waves, an obvious depiction of Enki. Water-spouting serpents protrude from each side of his throne. Flanking this central figure are two tree-like gods. The one on the right, whose branches have penis-shaped ends, holds up a bowl that presumably contains the fruit of life. The one on the left, whose branches have vagina-shaped ends, offers fruit-bearing branches, representing the tree of knowing, the God-given gift of procreation. Standing to the side is another great god. We suggest that it was Enlil. His anger at Enki is obvious. Okay, let me show you that picture. So, Enlil, Enki, penis tree, vagina tree. Water spouting serpents right here. Here and here. All right. We shall never know what caused this quote-unquote conflict in the Garden of Eden. But whatever Enki's motives were, we did succeed in perfecting the primitive worker and creating he did succeed in perfecting the primitive worker and in creating Homo sapiens who could have his own offspring. After man's acquisition of knowing, the Old Testament ceases to refer to him as the Adam and adopts as its subject Adam, a specific person, the first patriarch of the line of people with whom the Bible was concerned. But this coming of age of mankind also marked a schism between God and man. The parting of the ways, with man no longer a dumb serf of the gods, but a person tending for himself, is ascribed in the book of Genesis not to a decision by man himself, but to the imposition of a punishment by the deity. Lest the earthling also acquire the ability to escape mortality, he shall be cast out of the Garden of Eden. According to these sources, man's independent existence began not in southern Mesopotamia, where the Nephilim had established their cities and orchards, but to the east, in the Zagros Mountains. Quote, and he drove out the Adam and made him reside east of the Garden of Eden. End quote. Once more, then, biblical information conforms to scientific findings. Human culture began in the mountainous areas bordering the Mesopotamian plain. What a pity the biblical narrative is so brief, for it deals with what was man's first civilized life on earth. Cast out of the abode of the gods, doomed to a mortal's life, but able to procreate, man proceeded to do just that. The first Adam, with whose generations the Old Testament was concerned, knew his wife Eve, and she bore him a son, Cain, who tilled the land. Then Eve bore Abel, who was a shepherd. Hinting at homosexuality as the cause, the Bible relates that, quote, Cain rose up unto his brother Abel and killed him, end quote. Fearing for his life, Cain was given a protective sign by the deity and was ordered to move farther east. At first leading a nomad's life, he finally settled in, quote, the land of migration well east of Eden, end quote. There he had a son whom he named Enoch, inauguration, he has in parentheses, quote, and he built a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son, end quote. Enoch, in turn, had children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. In the 6th generation after Cain, Lamech was born. His 3 sons were credited by the Bible as the bearers of civilization. Jabal, quote, was the father of such as dwell in tents and have cattle, end quote. Jubal was the father of all that grasp lyre and harp, end quote. Tubal-Cain was the first smith. But Lamech, too, as his ancestor Cain, became involved in murder, this time of both a man and a child. It is safe to assume that the victims were not some humble strangers, for the book of Genesis dwells on the incident and considers it a turning point in the lineage of Adam. The Bible reports that Lamech summoned his 2 wives, mothers of his 3 sons, and confessed to them the double murder, declaring, quote, if Cain be 7-fold avenged, Lamech shall 70 and 7-fold. Lamech shall 70 and 7-fold, okay? End quote. This little understood statement must be assumed to deal with the succession. We see it as an admission by Lamech to his wives that the hope that the curse on Cain would be redeemed by the 7th generation, the generation of their sons, had come to naught. Now a new curse lasting much longer had been imposed on the house of Lamech. Confirming that the event concerned the line of succession, the following verses advise us of the immediate establishment of a new pure lineage. Quote, and Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son, and called his name Seth, foundation. For the deity hath founded for me another seed inside of Abel, instead of Abel whom Cain slew, end quote. The Old Testament at that point loses all interest in the defiled line of Cain and Lamech. Its ongoing tale of human events is henceforth anchored on the lineage of Adam through his son Seth and Seth's firstborn, Enosh. Or Enosh. I don't know. You tell me. whose name was acquired in he has acquired in Hebrew the generic connotation human being. It, um, quote, it was then, Genesis informs us, that it was begun to call upon the name of the deity, end quote. The enigmatic statement has baffled biblical scholars and theologians throughout the ages. It is followed by a chapter giving the genealogy of Adam through Seth and Enosh, I'm going to say, for 10 generations, ending with Noah, the hero of the deluge. The Sumerian text, which described the early stages when the gods were alone in Sumer, describe with equal precision the life of humans in Sumer at a later time, but before the deluge. The Sumerian and original story of the deluge has as its Noah a man of Shuruppak, a quote-unquote man of Shuruppak, the seventh city established by the Nephilim when they landed on Earth. At some point, then, the human beings banished from Eden were allowed to return to Mesopotamia to live alongside the gods, to serve them and to worship them. As we interpret the biblical statement, this happened in the days of Enosh. It was then that the gods allowed mankind back into Mesopotamia to serve the gods, quote, and to call upon the name of the deity, end quote. Eager to give the next epic event in the human saga, the deluge, the book of Genesis provides little information besides the names of the patriarchs who followed Enosh. But the meaning of each patriarch's name may suggest the events that took place during his lifetime. The son of Enosh, through whom the pure lineage continued, was Canaan, Little Cain. Some scholars take the name to mean metalsmith. Canaan's son was Mahalalel, praiser of God. He was followed by Jared, he who descended. His son was Enoch, consecrated one, who at age 365 was carried aloft by the deity. But 300 years earlier, at age 65, Enoch had begotten a son named Methuselah. Many scholars, following Letitia D. Jeffries in Ancient Hebrew Names, their significance and historical value, translate Methuselah as man of the missile. Methuselah's son was named Lamech, meaning he who was humbled, and Lamech begot Noah, respite, saying, quote, let this one comfort us concerning our work and the suffering of our hands by the earth which the deity hath accursed, end quote. Humanity, it appears, was undergoing great deprivations when Noah was born. The hard work and the toil were getting it nowhere, for earth, which was to feed them, was accursed. The stage was set for the deluge, the momentous event which was to wipe off the face of earth not only the human race but all life upon the land and in the skies. And the deity saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth. And quote, and the deity saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every desire of his heart's thoughts was only evil every day, and the deity repented that he had made man upon the earth, and his heart grieved. And the deity said, I will destroy the earthling whom I have created off the face of the earth, end quote. These are broad accusations presented as justifications for drastic measures to, quote, end all flesh, end quote. But they lack specificity, and scholars and theologians alike find no satisfactory answers regarding the sins or violations that could have upset the deity so much. The repeated use of the term flesh, both in the accusative verse and in the proclamations of judgment, suggests, of course, that the corruptions and violations had to do with the flesh. The deity grieved over the evil, quote, desire of man's thoughts, end quote. Man, it would seem, had discovered sex, having discovered sex, had become a sex maniac. But one can hardly accept that the deity would decide to wipe mankind off the face of the earth simply because man made too much love to their wives. The Mesopotamian texts speak freely and eloquently of sex and love-making among the gods. There are texts describing tender love between gods and their consorts, illicit love between a maiden and her lover, violent love as when Enlil raped Ninlil. There is a profusion of texts describing lovemaking and actual intercourse among the gods with their official consorts or unofficial concubines, with their sisters and daughters and even granddaughters. Making love to the latter was a favorite pastime of Enki. Such gods could hardly turn against mankind for behaving as they themselves did. The deity's motive, we find, was not merely concern for human morals. The mounting disgust was caused by a spreading defilement of the gods themselves. Seen in this light, the meaning of the baffling opening verses of Genesis 6 becomes clear. Quote, "And it came to pass, when the earthlings began to increase in number upon the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, and the sons of the deities saw the daughters of the earthlings, that they were compatible, and they took unto themselves wives of whichever they chose." End quote. As these verses would make clear, it was when the sons of the gods began to be sexually involved with earthlings, offspring, that the deity cried, "Enough." Quote, "And the deity said, My spirit shall not shield man forever. Having strayed, he is but flesh." End quote. The statement has remained enigmatic for millennia. Excuse me. Read in the light of our conclusions regarding the genetic manipulation that was brought to play in man's creation, the verses carry a message to our own scientists. The spirit of the gods, their genetic perfection of mankind, was beginning to deteriorate. Mankind had strayed, thereby reverting to being but flesh, closer to its animal, simian origins. We can now understand the stress put by the Old Testament on the distinction between Noah, quote, "a righteous man pure in his genealogies, and the whole earth," that's one quote, and another quote, "the whole earth that was corrupt," end quote. By intermarrying with the men and women of decreasing genetic purity, the gods were subjecting themselves to deterioration. By pointing out that Noah alone continued to be genetically pure, the biblical tale justifies the deity's contradiction. Having just decided to wipe all life off the face of the earth, he decided to save Noah and his descendants and, quote, "every clean animal," end quote, and other beasts and fowl, quote, "so as to keep seed alive upon the face of all the earth," end quote. Which to me begs the question, why would he not just start over? Create new ones. Anyway, the deity's plan to defeat his own initial purpose was to alert Noah to the coming catastrophe and guide him in the construction of a waterborne ark which would carry the people and the creatures that were to be saved. The notice given to Noah was a mere 7 days. Somehow he managed to build the ark and waterproof it, collect all the creatures and put them and his family aboard, and provision the ark in the allotted time. Quote, "And it came to pass after the 7 days that the waters of the deluge were upon the earth." End quote. What came to pass is best described in the Bible's own words. Quote, "On that day all the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the sluices of the heavens were opened. And the deluge was 40 days upon the earth, and the waters increased and bore up the ark. And it was lifted up above the earth, and the waters became stronger, and greatly increased upon the earth. And the ark floated upon the waters. And the waters became exceedingly strong upon the earth, and all the high mountains were covered, those that are under all the skies. 15 cubits above them did the water prevail, and the mountains were covered, and all flesh perished, both man and cattle and creeping things, and the birds of the skies were wiped off from the earth, and Noah only was left, and that which were with him in the ark. The waters prevailed upon earth 150 days, when the deity caused a wind to pass upon the earth, and the waters were calmed, and the fountains of the deep were dammed, as were the sluices of the heavens, and the rain from the skies was arrested, and the waters began to go back from upon the earth, coming and going back, and after 150 days the waters were less, and the ark rested on the mounts of Ararat." End quote. According to the biblical version, mankind's ordeal began in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month. That's a quote. The ark rested on the Mount of Ararat, quote, "in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month," end quote. The surge of the waters and their gradual going back, enough to lower the water level so that the ark rested on the peaks of Ararat, lasted then a full 5 months. Then, quote, "the waters continued to diminish until the peaks of the mountains," end quote, and not just the towering Ararats, quote, "could be seen on the 11th day of the 10th month," end quote, nearly 3 months later. Noah waited another 40 days. Then he sent out a raven and a dove, quote, "to see if the waters were abated from off the face of the ground," end quote. On the third try, the dove came back holding an olive leaf in her mouth, indicating that the waters had receded enough to enable treetops to be seen. After a while, Noah sent out the dove once more, but she returned not again, quote unquote. The deluge was over, and Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. Quote, "in the second month, on the 27th day of the month, did the earth dry up," end quote. It was the 601st year of Noah. The ordeal had lasted a year and 10 days. Then Noah and all that were with him in the ark came out, and he built an altar and offered burnt sacrifices to the deity. Quote, "and the deity smelled the enticing smell and said in his heart, I shall no longer curse the dry land on account of the earthling, for his heart's desire is evil from his youth." End quote. The happy ending is as full of contradictions as the deluge story itself. It begins with a long indictment of mankind for various abominations, including defilement of the purity of the younger gods. A momentous decision to have all flesh perish is reached and appears fully justified. Then the very same deity rushes in a mere 7 days to make sure that the seed of mankind and other creatures shall not perish. When the trauma is over, the deity is enticed by the smell of roasting meat. Where'd they get the meat? Did he decide to butcher some of the animals he kept? Thought he was supposed to be saving them for... and there was only 2 of them. Whatever. And forgetting his original determination to put an end to mankind, dismisses the whole thing with an excuse, blaming man's evil desires on his youth. These nagging doubts of the story's veracity disperse, however, when we realize that the biblical account is an edited version of the original Sumerian account. As in the other instances, the monotheistic Bible has compressed into one deity the roles played by several gods who were not always in accord. Until the archaeological discoveries of the Mesopotamian civilization and the decipherment of the Akkadian and Sumerian literature, the biblical story of the deluge stood alone, supported only by scattered primitive mythologies around the world. The discovery of the Akkadian Epic of Gilgamesh placed the Genesis deluge tale in older and venerable company, further enhanced by later discoveries of older texts and fragments of the Sumerian original. The hero of the Mesopotamian deluge account was Ziusudra in Sumerian, Utnapishtim in Akkadian, who was taken after the deluge to the celestial abode of the gods to live there happily ever after. When, in his search for immortality, Gilgamesh finally reached the place, he sought Utnapishtim's advice on the subject of life and death. Utnapishtim disclosed to Gilgamesh and through him to all post-diluvial mankind the secret of his survival. Quote, "a hidden matter, a secret of the gods," end quote. The true story, one might say, of the Great Flood. The secret revealed by Utnapishtim was that before the onslaught of the deluge, the gods held council and voted on the destruction of mankind. The vote and the decision were kept secret, but Enki searched out Utnapishtim, the ruler of Surupak, to inform him of the approaching calamity. Adopting clandestine methods, Enki spoke to Utnapishtim from behind a reed screen. Quote, At first his disclosures were cryptic. Then his warning and advice were clearly stated. Now's the quote. Man of Shurapak, son of Ubar Tutu, tear down the house, build a ship, give up possessions, seek thou life. Forswear belongings, keep soul alive. Aboard ship take thou the seed of all living things. That ship thou shalt build, her dimensions shall be to measure. End quote. The parallels with the biblical story are obvious. A deluge is about to come. One man is forewarned. He is to save himself by preparing a specially constructed boat. He is to take with him and save the seeds of all living things. Yet the Babylonian version is more plausible. The decision to destroy and the effort to save are not contradictory acts of the same single deity, but the acts of different deities. Moreover, the decision to forewarn and save the seed of man is the defiant act of one god, Enki, acting in secret and contrary to the joint decision of the other great gods. Why did Enki risk defying the other gods? Was he solely concerned with the preservation of his quote-unquote wondrous works of art? Or did he act against the background of a rising rivalry or enmity between him and his brother Enlil? The existence of such a conflict between the two brothers is highlighted in the deluge story. Utnapishtim asked Enki the obvious question. How could he, Utnapishtim, explain to the other citizens of Shurapak the construction of an oddly shaped vessel and the abandonment of all possessions? Enki advised him, quote, Thou shalt thus speak unto them. I have learnt that Enlil is hostile to me, so that I cannot reside in our city, nor set my foot in Enid's territory. To the Apsu I will therefore go down, to dwell with my lord Ea. End quote. The excuse was thus to be that, as Enki's follower, Utnapishtim, could no longer dwell in Mesopotamia, and that he was building a boat in which he intended to sail to the lower world, southern Africa by our findings, to dwell there with his lord Ea/Enki. Verses that follow suggest that the area was suffering from a drought or a famine. Utnapishtim, on Enki's advice, was to assure the residents of the city that if Enlil saw him depart, quote, the land shall again have its fill of harvest riches, end quote. This excuse made sense to the other residents of the city. Thus misled, the people of the city did not question, but actually lent a hand in the construction of the ark. By killing and serving them bullocks and sheep every day, and by lavishing upon them rest, red wine, oil, and white wine, Utnapishtim encouraged them to work faster. Even children were pressed to carry bitumen for waterproofing. Quote, On the seventh day the ship was completed. The launching was very difficult, so they had to shift the floor, planks above and below, until 2/3 of the structure had gone into the water of the Euphrates. Then Utnapishtim put all his family and kin aboard the ship, taking along whatever he had of all the living it's a quote within the quote, whatever I had of all the living creatures, as well as the animals of the field and the wild beasts of the field. So there's the end of the full quote. The parallels with the biblical tale, even down to the 7 days of construction, are clear. Going a step beyond Noah, however, Utnapishtim also sneaked aboard all the craftsmen who had helped him build the ship. He himself was to go aboard only upon a certain signal, whose nature Enki had also revealed to him, a stated time to be set by Shamash, the deity in charge of the fiery rockets. This was Enki's order, quote, When Shamash, who orders a trembling at dusk, will shower down a rain of eruptions, board thou the ship, batten up the entrance, end quote. We are left guessing at the connection between this apparent firing of a space rocket by Shamash and the arrival of the moment for Utnapishtim to board his ark and seal himself inside it. But the moment did arrive. The space rocket did cause a trembling at dusk, quote unquote. There was a shower of eruptions. The Utnapishtim, quote, battened down the whole ship, end quote, and, quote, handed over the structure together with its contents to Puzur Amuri, the boatman, end quote. The storm came, quote, with the first glow of dawn, end quote. There was awesome thunder. A black cloud rose up from the horizon. The storm tore out the posts of buildings and piers. Then the dikes gave. Darkness followed, quote, turning to blackness all that had been light, and the wide land was shattered like a pot, end quote. And now we have a long quote. For 6 days and 6 nights the southern storm blew, gathering speed as it blew, submerging the mountains, overtaking the people like a battle. When the 7th day arrived, the flood carrying south storm subsided in the battle which it had fought like an army. The sea grew quiet, the tempest was still, the flood ceased. I looked at the weather, stillness had set in, and all of mankind had returned to clay. The will of Enlil and the assembly of gods was done. End quote. But unknown to them, the scheme of Enki had also worked. Floating in the stormy waters was a vessel carrying men, women, and children, and other living creatures. With the storm over, Utnapishtim, quote, opened a hatch, light fell upon my face, end quote. He looked around, quote, the landscape was as level as a flat roof, end quote. Bowing low, he sat and wept, quote, tears running down on my face, end quote. He looked about for a coastline in the expanse of the sea. He saw none. Excuse me. Then, quote, there emerged a mountain region. On the Mount of Salvation the ship came to a halt. Mount Nasir, salvation, held the ship fast, allowing no motion, end quote. For 6 days Utnapishtim watched from the motionless ark, caught in the peaks of the Mount of Salvation, the biblical peaks of Ararat. Then, like Noah, he sent out a dove to look for a resting place, but it came back. A swallow flew out and came back. Then a raven was set free and flew off, finding a resting place. Utnapishtim then released all the birds and animals that were with him and stepped out himself. He built an altar and offered a sacrifice, just as Noah had. But here again the single deity, multi-deity differences crops up. When Noah offered a burnt sacrifice, quote, Yahweh smelled the enticing smell, end quote. But when Utnapishtim offered a sacrifice, quote, the gods smelled the savor, the gods smelled the sweet savor, the gods crowded like flies about a sacrificer, end quote. In the Genesis version, it was Yahweh who vowed never again to destroy mankind. In the Babylonian version, it was the great goddess who vowed, quote, I shall not forget, I shall be mindful of these days, forgetting them never, end quote. That, however, was not the immediate problem. For when Enlil finally arrived on the scene, he had little mind for food. He was hopping mad to discover that some had survived. Quote, has some living soul escaped? No man was to survive the destruction, end quote. Ninurta, his son and heir, immediately pointed a suspecting finger at Enki. Quote, who other than Ea can devise plans? It is Ea alone who knows every matter, end quote. Far from denying the charge, Enki launched one of the world's most eloquent defense summations, praising Enlil for his own wisdom and suggesting that Enlil could not possibly be unreasoning, a realist. Enki mixed denial with confession. Quote, it was not I who disclosed the secrets of the gods, end quote. I merely let one man and, quote, exceedingly wise, end quote, exceedingly wise one, perceive by his own wisdom what the god's secret was. And if indeed this earthling is so wise, Enki suggested to Enlil, let's not ignore his abilities. Quote, now then, take counsel in regard to him, end quote. All this, the Epic of Gilgamesh relates, was the secret of the gods that Utnapishtim told Gilgamesh. He then told Gilgamesh of the final event, having been influenced by Enki's argument. Quote, Enlil thereupon went aboard the ship. Holding me by the hand, he took me aboard. He took my wife aboard, made her kneel by my side. Standing between us, he touched our foreheads to bless us. Hitherto Utnapishtim has been but human. Henceforth Utnapishtim and his wife shall be unto us like gods. Utnapishtim shall reside in the far away at the mouth of the waters. End quote. And Utnapishtim concluded his story to Gilgamesh. Quote, after he was taken to reside in the faraway, Anu and Enlil gave him life like a god, elevated him to eternal life like a god. End quote. And what happened to mankind in general? The biblical tale ends with an assertion that the deity then permitted and blessed mankind to, quote, be fruitful and multiply, end quote. Mesopotamian versions of the deluge story also end with verses that deal with mankind's procreation. The partially mutilated texts speak of the establishment of human categories. Quote, let there be a third category among the humans. Let there be among the humans women who bear and women who do not bear. There were apparently new guidelines for sexual intercourse, regulations for the human race. Let the let the male to the young maiden, let the young maiden something. It's a cutoff line. The young man to the young maiden. When the bed is laid, let the spouse and her husband lie together. End quote. So there's some broken lines there. Enlil was outmaneuvered. Mankind was saved and allowed to procreate. The gods opened up earth to man. And that is the end of that chapter. We've got two more. Excuse me. Let me see real quick before I end. I want to see how long that last chapter is. Okay. The last chapter is only 12 pages. So probably I will go ahead and tough it out and read both of those in the next reading, which if I double up on my readings like I was planning, that will be Tuesday. So we'll finish it up then. All right. Who we got out there? Vesper's on. Hot Dog Raw Dog's on. Yeah, I'm not feeling like raiding tonight. I'm just going to call it. So I will see you all in the next one tomorrow night. Another reading in the Dark Elf trilogy. So I will see you then.
just calling to say I'm just calling to say I